this is me coming up with a fictitious code example, small enough that hopefully you can digest in this session. And I refactored it in 8 different steps. So this is step 1, where this is the screen implemented in Angular. It uses a REST service, and it fetches the user using this send request method. Oh, let me make this larger. Is this good? Okay. So every request, regardless of whether it's get or post, goes through this send request. So I'm sending a request to the database to get all the users, and this is how it tells the database I want the users. And this is I'm posting a user. So you pass 2 additional parameters to post a user. This is to save a new version of the user into the database, or a new user into the database. And this library, this API looks like this. You send a GET request to this URL. This is coming from sweetdata.com, which is a fictitious data service that I created. I actually didn't create it. It's fiction. And to get the list of users, you would send a request to this URL, and then you get the data back in this format. It will have this property called users, so you have to drill into the users property to get the array of users like this. But for companies, you actually put the word company here in the URL, and the property now is instead companies instead of users. Okay, so the first person who implemented this REST service, this is what they did. They make this request. Well, this just puts, this send request can either get or post. This is very heavily related to the three little pigs story as well. I'm just realizing it. But you mentally, you can also think about, relate this to the 3 little pigs as well. Okay, so you can either get or post, but by default it's get. So if you don't pass that in, it's get. It's gonna get the stuff, and here there's this if statement that says, if what you're trying to get, which was passed in from here, if what you're trying to get is the user, and if it's a get method, it's actually gonna go into the user's property in order to grab this array for you. That's the .users. But if it's company, it'll go into the company's property to grab that company's array for you. I'm sure you know which little pig this resembles at this point. For people who have seen that story. There's also a vehicle, but if it doesn't match any of these, it'll just return the data as is. Curiously. Okay, so this is version 1. Version 2 is, I decided I just really don't like that if it doesn't match any of the ones that it handles, it just returns the data as is. In my opinion, if you see that there's something you might potentially have missed, you just throw an exception if you didn't write the code to handle that case. So that's what I recommend in a lot of cases. When you foresee that, oh, I have to handle all these cases, but I can't do them all at once. I'm just handling these cases for now. You just have a else statement or something that tells you it's one of the other cases. I'm gonna throw an error so that if there's a developer coming along hitting the cases that I haven't handled, they'll get an error telling them, no, our code doesn't do that yet. If you want it, you're gonna have to write that code. I didn't do it. Or you can call me and beg me to do it. Okay. Instead of mysteriously returning something cryptic. So that's my first change. My second change, example 3, is as you probably have guessed, I really hate this gigantic if statement here. That's symptomatic of the modes pig. And you can see this growing because clearly we probably will have to handle more model types than just 3. And the more you add to the list, the more ridiculous this is going to become. So I decided to do away with this entire section of complexness. Instead of having a switcher, basically, you actually don't need the switcher if you're at the higher level of context where you have business savvy knowledge. So that's an insight. No, this is not how it should be. This should have been that. So just go into the property yourself. Like, why are you doing why are you making the why are you making the reusable piece of the code do this? You have the context here, just do it yourself. There's no need. So I just removed all this code. That's just all it does is go into the right property based on what you passed in. You do it yourself. I think this is this would be symptomatic of one of the other pigs. Okay, so here it's like, let's add some helper methods to help with that drilling down of the property, so that instead of calling into just the very generic send request, you're calling into get users and get companies and get vehicles, and then you don't have to drill down to this property, just to free you up of doing that. There's not very high ROI to doing this, but you do get to write code like this to call get users, which is more intentional versus send requests. Maybe, I don't know what you think about whether this is better or than this version.
More explicit.
It's more explicit. Yeah. So that's the next step that I changed. One thing I want to say relating to the REST service. Let's just talk about the REST service, where we would place the REST service in the quadrant. Yeah, in the first version, example 1, we would definitely put it in the 4th quadrant here, clever and savvy. It has all of this terminology that's the domain of the business, like user, company, vehicle. There's business domain vocabulary there. And we have it, so thus savviness, it's clever. There's just a lot of content in here, so reading through this will take more mental power. It's not super clever, but there's a lot of content, which just by having a lot of content increases the cleverness. So at this point, which quadrant does the REST service belong? I will remove that gigantic if statement here. That's it. If you want it, you do that yourself, basically. So we just remove that.
Savvy and it's less clever. It's not very clever.
Oh yeah, so it's actually we reduced it. Initially it was here. You're saying we moved it towards here. It's still somewhat clever, I would say. So maybe it's like around here.
Yeah.
We're moving in a Cartesian coordinate system. Okay, so this one, we actually brought back some savviness in just putting these helper methods here. Although it doesn't hurt the cleverness. So maybe it's like, we moved it a little bit back here. Oh, this one I actually, whereas the previous case, we just had one send request that handled both gets and posts. I decided to split it up into a get and a post. And so the get user will call into the get, whereas the save user will call into the post. That's the only change, and we actually didn't change the UI code at all. We only changed because the UI code was using these more savvy helper methods. So we only changed the internals of the REST service and split this send request up into a get versus a post. And actually there's quite a bit of duplication between these two. So where do you think we have we moved anywhere in this? It's less clever. So we moved it up in terms of savviness, probably the same, right?
Yeah.
So we sort of moved it back up a little bit.
Wait, no. You said less clever, it's going left.
Oh, thanks. It's going left here, maybe. So it's dumb, it's in, so it's not so dumb, that's all the way, I'd say. Maybe like, it's moving. Okay, so that yeah, very precise. We're gonna write some equations to calculate the exact number. One thing I would mention is when I split this send request up into a get versus a post, we did make it less clever by removing this if statement, right? Because there's no need for the if statement to figure out whether we're posting or not posting. Mm-hmm. And in general, eliminating if statements have the effect of making code less clever. If you want to make a piece of code easier to read, try to remove if statements.
That doesn't mean
Huh?
that doesn't mean turn arrays.
That doesn't mean ternary. If you remove a ternary, you get 2 points. I use this pluralize npm module to figure out, based on the name of the model, to figure out the plural version of the name, so that it will automatically, if you ask for users, you get the user string in here, I can automatically convert that to users because this pluralize package does that for me. So what I'm saying, if you like pluralize user, it'll give you users. And if you pluralize company, it'll actually give you companies spelled the correct way. That's magic. And this actually exists.
Tell the API developer
we have access to the API developer. We just tell them not to use the pluralized form.
Right.
So this is a piece of magic that I decided to bring in for some reason.
Wait, did it do it in Chinese?
Did it?
Look at that case. There.
But for Chinese, there's no change. There's no S in Chinese that you would. Okay. After this change, like the user, or not even the user, like there used to be this extra like .users here. That's not needed anymore because I can do it for all the cases. I don't even care if you're adding new models that I don't know about. I am assuming this magical function will work for those cases as well.
So
Until I'm wrong, and then I'm screwed. But I'm just gonna assume the API uses proper English pluralization that matches up with whatever this module is doing. And I'm gonna assume that works.
So
If it doesn't, then somebody has a hard time debugging this code.
Right. So
But-
we've taken a real hard turn towards clever.
So yeah, so let's update this plot. Let's update this plot. Where do we just go?
More clever, less study.
More clever and less. I agree. So we
Clever.
okay.
But you think
Wait,
it became more ignorant?
Yes.
No, it became more ignorant because we don't have to drill down ourselves in the users or counter.
But it still knows all about them.
Yeah.
That's the
Supposedly.
savvy, right?
No, go down. It still
But
knows.
it's less savvy.
Yeah, that's less savvy.
It still has.
It
all
is.
this.
It has these, which
Yeah.
still makes it savvy, which I'm gonna remove in the next step. But
So you just contract out the savvy work to like libraries.
I contract. I contract.
out
That's
the
a.
savvy part to somebody else.
It's we increase the savviness because increase the cleverness because the module is very clever. I didn't write it, but I know the internals of that function is very clever.
But
It just made it more
doesn't have to
clever for
do
now,
that users.
right?
Yeah.
That's
But then the next step, I remove all those helper functions. So I just decided, you know what, all this savviness, I'm just gonna remove it, so that when you call it, you just call the generic get.
Amazing.
So now what do you do here?
Less savvy.
It's more ignorant now, right? Yeah. So you just moved it up in this direction. And then, this one, all I did was extract some of the common code between get and post into these two helper methods. That's all I did. So there used to be a lot of duplication between these two ones. I did the links pick thing, basically. I made the two helpers that both of them would use in where they have paths in common. What does this do to the code, if anything? More clever?
I think it's less clever.
Yeah, it's
'Cause it-
easier to read.
Well, because now it's requiring you to put in more information. Like the code itself doesn't do very much other than all it does is concatenate a URL string based off of a string that you pass into it. So it's pretty.
But why do you think it's more clever though?
Because copying and pasting chunks of code is fairly dumb or like.
But what about from the perspective of the newcomer to this code that's reading it for the first time?
I guess
What
it would be about as easy to read as before.
about the same?
Yeah.
But maybe more easy to read because like when you see that chunk of code in two places, you don't know it's the same chunk. Like when you're reading through the methods, but now you know it's the same same chunk of code because you've extracted it and you've named it for what it does.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think that, I don't know if this is part of the lesson, but it's sometimes you do things that decrease the cleverness in one place and increase the cleverness in another
Yes,
place.
that's true.
So I think the lesson is how do we start extracting things so that all the clever and dumb stuff is in one place and all
You
the
have to
savvy-
take a global sum
Right.
of the cleverness in everything.
So I-
Whenever you extract a method, the reader, if he may be like, what is this really doing? And he has to scroll to over or jump, click into it and then read this and then jump back. And if he doesn't feel the need to do that, then it would be easy. But if he did feel the need to do that, it might be harder.
Sure.
Sometimes like this is very straightforward extraction, and sometimes it's like there's just a little bit difference between this and this, and there's another little bit difference
Yeah.
between this and this. And once you extract to something that you think is very clever, but it's really hard to read through.
And,
Yeah.
Well, I think that something that helps makes code less clever is TypeScript, because sometimes I don't need to jump in and understand the thing. I just need to understand what it returns.
You can hover over the thing, it'll tell you what's the input and what's the output.
Right. So it depends on. Sometimes the TypeScript can handle it to make it less clever.
It also depends on whether these methods are named in a way that would induce the reader to want to drill in or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like if you named it so unambiguously and clear that he thinks, yeah, I understand what it's trying to do, I'm just gonna move on.
MID.